Hi, Social 30s. Welcome to week 6. I missed doing this for you guys last week, but we'll get to chat this week during our Teams webinar. So just some information and a bit of an update for Social 30. So position papers should be coming in. So I extended the due date till Monday, and I've spoken to a couple of you that some things came up or people got sick or whatever. So that's fine. But for the rest of you, it should be in on Monday unless you've specifically spoken to me. Your gradebook did change again. I sent an email out to your parents. So please make sure you just understand everything that changed last week. And any missing assignments, I posted them for people and I assigned them individually. So you would have gotten an individual kind of notice for that. So if you saw that, please just complete and let me know ASAP. There wasn't too many in this class. So okay, thanks to everybody who completed that week 4 feedback form. It does really help me out. I posted out a new one for week 5 in the position paper. As you're posting new assignments, a couple of you requested like, oh, can you post them kind of as you get them? The reason I'm not doing that is because when I post them all like Monday morning at 9 a.m., it kind of gives you the flexibility to complete whenever you need. So like if you need more time than Friday, that's okay. It just kind of gives that opportunity to post it on Monday and then go throughout the week. And because I really only do one assignment a week, I don't really have new stuff that comes out throughout the week. I do not know what's going on with my computer here and why it keeps flashing out, but I'll just keep going. So that's kind of why I've done that on the Monday. If you get it done sooner, your assignment, hand it in sooner. If you need a couple extra days, that's fine. Just let me know. And most of you are pretty good with that. So hopefully this is working. The general feedback was that like the rack that I'm posting is useful to you guys. So, but if you have any other comments, just let me know. Okay. Okay, and on that note, our rack for the week. So watch this weekly update, which hopefully you're already doing. And then there's another video that you'll need to complete for the assessment this week. And it's called Why is America's Death Toll So High? And it's a video from The Economist. It's a really interesting video. And it kind of talks about like the differences between how the United States has handled things compared to other countries. And it really all combines in with what we're doing this week, which is complexities of liberalism in practice. So I tried to split up the readings that I wanted you to do. So you don't have to read all of that section in the textbook, but just like the specific pages I've listed there. We will have a Teams meeting on April 29th. And then this week, I'm actually doing a Google Forms with you guys. And so there's some like multiple choice questions in there that you can complete, but then also some short answer and some long answer. And then I'll take that in for marks. So basically what we're looking at this week is how do we protect rights in liberal democracies? And how do we balance kind of the common good with respect for individual rights? So we'll go through the PowerPoint. So is it ever acceptable for a liberal democracy to suspend the rights of a few to protect the rights of the common good? So this is actually normally well, everything's interesting in social studies, but this is actually normally a really interesting topic that we go over. We go over Omar Khadr, which is this man here on the left. We talk about Guantanamo Bay. We talk about limiting rights, like within the Vietnam War and like protests against the government and things like that. So that's kind of like the underlying question of this chapter is it ever okay to suspend the rights of the few to protect the common good, which incidentally is going on a lot right now in our world. Okay. So we're basically looking at the differences between collective security and individual rights and freedoms. And so sometimes the government, in order to protect its citizens, means we have to suspend some rights, which is what's happening right now, right? We have limited rights on what we can do and where we can go and how we can work and things like that. The other end of the spectrum is no, our individual rights and freedoms must be protected at all costs. And so the government kind of needs to try and find a balance. How can we look at protecting the collective, but then also protecting individuals from the collective, which is represented by the government? And so there's a lot of complexities within liberalism here. So like fundamental rights and freedoms, obviously the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, it's very unique in that it's solely kind of identified for Canadian citizens. But these are fundamental rights, the right to liberty and personal safety. Now, is this necessary in every circumstance? Well, no. Generally, you don't need to worry about going outside your house and having to be concerned about your personal safety within Canada. Now, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms promotes these rights. They can't be easily overturned. It's very difficult to to lose those rights, but it can infringe on the rights of others. And that's where some of those problems come in. So I think I talked about in class before the Keegstra case within Southern Alberta. And so he was a social studies teacher who actually basically said that the Holocaust had never happened. And he said that he had a lot of really horrible things that he said about Jews and about pro-Nazi and things like that. And then when people came back at him, he's like, well, this is my personal freedoms. I'm allowed to say these things. And it's like, well, no, because you're infringing on the rights of others. And so you're essentially promoting hate speech, which goes against freedom of speech within the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So it's very rights legislation is very strongly protected within Canada. Within reason. Now there's flexibility because people have differences like in their religion and gender identity and things like that. And so that makes changes on the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. But fundamental rights are prescribed by law within Canada. So there's some details on page 373 there about the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms and also the Quebec Charter of Rights and Freedoms, because Quebec actually has its own charter within the province. And so this was brought out in 1975. And it's kind of it's almost like a constitutional law in Quebec as far as they have a constitutional law. And so it actually has precedence over all other provincial legislation within Quebec, the Quebec Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms. And so only the Constitution of Canada and the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms actually takes priority over the Quebec Charter, which makes it quite unique within Canada. Now, in some countries, if they're labeled dictatorships or totalitarian states, obviously individual rights and freedoms are, they've been subjugated to what the needs of the state are. Even if they do have a constitution or another document about rights and freedoms, if you're living in a dictatorship or a totalitarian state, your individual rights and freedoms, even with that charter, basically kind of get shifted away to protect the collective. So there's some examples on page 379 to 80 in your textbook on recognition of collective rights. And it kind of talks about some different things that have gone on with the charter and Métis rights and Indigenous rights and things like that. So you can take a look at that within your book. One of the things I want you to look at is language legislation. So on page 381, there's a article about breaking language legislation within Quebec. And so you're actually going to be asked a question on that in the Google Forms this week. But it's kind of looking at what's the difference between the common good and respect for rights? Because in Quebec, under their language laws, everything basically has to be French first, to put it in very basic terms. So public signs and commercial advertising have to be in French. They can be in French and another language as long as French is the predominant language. So when I was in Quebec City a couple summers ago, I kind of took note of this. And it's true, pretty much everything is French first and then other things second, which is really funny when, for example, in the article here, it's talking about an Irish pub. And so an Irish pub obviously would not generally speak French first. And so they have advertisements for like Guinness and stuff like that. And so typical Irish type pub things. And then people complain basically saying well, it's not in French. Now, obviously Guinness would probably not be in French because it's not a French product, right? And so kind of where's the line there? Do we have leeway on this or do we have to recognize those laws first? Okay. And so is Quebec basically limiting people's freedom of expression with its language laws, because you're basically telling even Quebecois that they are not allowed to have this freedom, okay? So should the common good, the good for most, take precedence over the good for some? So these are some things I want you to think about, because next week we're going to talk about a lot more of these specifics. So what about wearing the burqa in France? It's actually illegal to wear the burqa in France. So to have a total face covering if you're Muslim. Okay. What about the War Measures Act, which we now have as the Emergencies Act within Canada? This is protecting the good of the most over individual rights. What about the Indian Act? Okay, this is still in existence today, and this still has not protected individual rights. What about the Patriot Act, which I'm going to talk to you guys about a lot next week, okay? What about Aboriginal land claims? What about Guantanamo Bay? These are all things that I want you to think about. When does the good of the most take precedence over the good of individuals, okay? One thing I want you to make sure you understand the term for is illiberal. So illiberal is when ideologies are opposed to the values, beliefs, and principles of liberalism, which seems basic, and I hope you can understand. So religious freedom can technically be an individual right or a collective right. But like I said about the burqa in France, so the French government, which is a liberal democracy, can be viewed as illiberal at times because they've actually placed a lot of restrictions on religious symbolism. A lot of this comes from the history of like the French Revolution and things like that. But they've basically placed limitations on these religions within a liberal society. And so it's really opposed to what they promote in their laws. And it's not just them. There are lots of other countries that do this as well. Another thing I want you to think about, because you're going to have or part of your assignment this week is on it, is should liberal democracies always adhere to the principles of liberalism? So, for example, Canadian soldiers who were stationed in Afghanistan had email and internet access restricted. Some say it's just to protect themselves from the Taliban, but others say it's censorship. Or in the United States, where obviously the war on terror was like a major defining part of the 21st century. So there's a provision called stop loss. And so in the US Armed Forces, basically they can force soldiers to stay in the military longer than they originally required to if they need them. So if they need the soldiers to basically fight. And so obviously that's kind of restricting their freedoms, because if they've signed on, it's like signing a contract. So you've signed on to fight for whatever, a 2-year tour. And then the military comes to you and says like, you know what, we really need you to stay longer. So we're signing you on for another 6 months to a year. Like, should they really be allowed to do that? Are you signed up for the military? So is this kind of your job now? Those are the things I want you to think about. So we will talk about this more next week: the War Measures Act, anti-terrorism, internment, the October crisis, martial law, and then I'm actually going to give you a full movie to watch, which should be entertaining for all of you. So just keep those things in mind. Think about illiberal acts in liberal states, and when do we find a line? So this is the video I want you to watch: COVID-19, why is America's death toll so high? And it came out this last week. And so it's about a week old. So keep that in mind when you're looking at the numbers and stuff. But it's really interesting because it talks about the differences between how the United States has handled stuff compared to how Canada has handled stuff, and illiberalism within, or the argument of illiberalism within the two countries. Okay. And then you're going to do this Google form response, which I learned how to do this week. So that's why you're doing it. So please make sure you complete that. We'll have that Teams meeting, which will be nice to see you guys again, because I didn't have one last week with you. I'll record it to post afterwards, but please try to show up. It's good to see you guys, and it's good to kind of get feedback and have some discussions and things like that. So I'll post the invite for you on Monday. Okay. And that's pretty much it for this week. So this week and next week, I tried to make a little bit more chill for your assignments, just because I know that the position paper was a lot for some of you. So if you have any concern or anything's going on, just let me know. Please fill out that self-evaluation form in the no section on your classwork, because it's really useful. And please join me Wednesday so I have more human interaction. Please, please. It's nice to talk to you guys, and it's nice to see you guys. And it just, it's good to have discussions and not just hear me talking all the time. So that's it. And I will see you on Wednesday. Bye, guys.